Hey there, I'm Kate and this is Monocat. And today I'm going to talk about what rules for riding PEV exist in Poland and how it looks like to ride there in reality. So let's get this started. I've been living in Poland for around 1.5 years now, and the last half a year of that I've been riding EUC actively. With our recent trip through Europe, I realized that even if some of the rules are similar when it comes to PEVs, the reality of how and where you can ride is quite different. In Poland, I was mostly riding in Warsaw. So when we made our recent short trip to Gdańsk, it was interesting for me to see that riding EUC there was quite similar to Warsaw in how fast and where we can go, but the traffic felt more relaxed, which was a nice change. When it comes to the rules for riding PEVs in Poland, for quite a long time there weren't any regulations, and for EUC especially. So from the legal standpoint, EUC riders were considered pedestrians. Very fast pedestrians. So just recently, with the growing popularity of PEVs, they decided that it's time to create some new rules. So the current rules are that in Poland, PEVs are allowed to ride on 3 different types of paths. It is allowed to ride on the sidewalk, but only in the speed of a pedestrian, which is not the same as walking speed. Then the second one is that you're allowed to go on bike lanes, no matter if they are on the sidewalk or on the street, and there you have a speed limit which is up to 25 kilometers an hour. And last but not least, you are allowed to go on a street that has a speed limit of 30 kilometers an hour, but PEVs are allowed to go only there up till 20 kilometers an hour. But when it comes to the reality, most of those rules are not really easy to implement. This is mostly due to the infrastructure and the general speed of the traffic. When it comes to the sidewalks, it is possible to drive as slow as a walking pedestrian, but it's actually in my eyes more dangerous, since due to the low speed it is easy to get off balance and fall off the wheel or scooter. Also, I think that most pedestrians are not very keen of having a EUC rider or e-scooter right behind their back, just trying to stay on their vehicle. There are also some bikes on the sidewalk, and even though they are not allowed there, but only on the shared paths, in most cases the police doesn't seem to mind, and tickets for that are very rare. So as long as you're fast enough to overtake a pedestrian and are stable, there's usually no problem, as long as you just don't speed excessively. And away from parks, shops or shopping malls, most sidewalks are quite empty, especially during the week. So no one will stop you if you go faster there, as long as you slow down if one of the rare pedestrians come in sight. Bike paths have mostly a good quality, especially outside of the city center. But sometimes they forget a needed connection, so then it's time for some mild off-roading. Also, most bike paths feel like they are there because there was enough space, so sometimes they just stop and you're suddenly on the road or sidewalk. And if you would go strictly 25 kilometers an hour, which is the rule for bike paths, you would be overtaken by quite a lot of bikes actually, with exception of maybe older people, families, or people just having a relaxed biking time. So going there with the speed of the bikes or 30 to 35 kilometers an hour is very normal, even for cyclists, especially the more sporty ones. They tend to go up to 40 or 45 kilometers an hour, so they are usually overtaking me when I'm on my Tesla V2. And when it comes to riding on streets that have a 30 kilometers an hour speed limit, you can go only up to 20 kilometers an hour there, which already sounds a bit difficult, and it is because most cars don't go 30 kilometers in those streets. That is because speeding is very common in Warsaw and the rest of Poland. The law doesn't do much to prevent it, and due to those rules and that most policemen just do not seem to care, it won't change that soon. It is just part of the daily traffic. I've personally seen the police most active when there are either riots, protests, people jaywalking or drinking in public. But for traffic they rarely seem to care. And this results in cars going commonly 10 to 20 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. Also, parking spots are more like recommendations, and I see from time to time cars parked either on the sidewalk or the bicycle lane. And also crossing a red light happens quite often, so you always want to be on the lookout when you're crossing an intersection. This can be especially dangerous since there are not only streets with 50 kilometers an hour limits, but also some with 80. This means that we see quite often cars going over 100 kilometers an hour inside the city. And if those drivers have an accident, they don't only injure themselves, which they are quite well protected from in their cars, but can easily injure others as well. And a EUC driver, for example, can also create quite some damage if they have an accident. But a 30 kilogram vehicle is still way less harmful than a 2 tons one. And on the PEV, the possibility that you injure yourself during an accident is higher than that you will injure somebody else, as long as you don't ride aggressively close to them. All of this should not be an excuse to ride recklessly on a PEV, but it seems kinda odd that here in Poland the fine for driving up to 50 kilometers an hour over the speed limit with a car is 500 zloty. And if you go faster than that, it is the same price, but your license will be taken away for 3 months. And if you speed with a PEV or even a regular bike, so that would be like going 40 kilometers in total if you're one of the very sporty ones, you will also get a 500 zloty fine. Of course, the likelihood that this will get enforced is very low, but just saying. So this whole situation has its upsides and downsides. The obvious downside is that cars speed like crazy, even in 30 kilometers an hour streets, which are mostly residential areas or have many shops. So sometimes they go 50 in 30 kilometers an hour streets and 60 or even up to 80 in 50 kilometers an hour streets. In Warsaw, this is very extreme. In Gdańsk, the drivers were in general a bit slower and a bit more relaxed during driving, but when we went in a 30 kilometers an hour street, we went 35 to 40 and cars would still overtake us. As an example, here in Warsaw I'm on a 30 kilometers an hour street, and when the car is approaching rapidly from behind, I was already going 38 kilometers an hour. And I'm pretty sure that if the crossings in the middle wouldn't have been there, the car would have tried to overtake me. This makes it dangerous to choose the road as an option. The upside is that the police also doesn't care about faster PEVs, as long as you don't annoy them or bring someone actively in harm's way. So if your PEV is fast enough and you have enough control over it, you can also go on a street with a 50 km/h limit. But I personally wouldn't recommend that. The possibility that police will do anything about you is very low. I only heard of just a couple of scooters that got a fine for riding on a road which had the speed limit over 30 km/h, but this is a very rare occasion. So if you have experience riding in Poland or would like to come to Poland to ride here, let me know in the comments. I myself try not to take the streets that often and stick to the bike lanes. Only if it's a rather empty one, at night, or at least not during rush hour, I occasionally ride on a 30 km/h street too. So on the one side you get the freedom to ride your PEV all around the town, and as long as you don't bother the police or endanger someone, you can go as fast as your heart desires. But on the other side, some of the cars drive quite recklessly and are speeding constantly, so it is always a bit dangerous when you want to go onto the road. So with that being said, in Poland and especially Warsaw, it is quite hectic and sometimes dangerous to ride in, but also gives you a lot of freedom on how fast and where you want to ride. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you feel really fancy, you might subscribe. See you next time.